It started with a phone call that should have meant nothing. Just another quiet Friday in Austin, bourbon glass sweating on the oak table, the hum of the ceiling fan filling a house too large for one man. The rain outside was half-hearted, tapping at the window like a memory that refused to leave. When the phone buzzed, I didn't rush. Nobody calls me at night anymore, not since Ellen passed. "Dad, we need to talk." That voice, sharp, polished, too businesslike for a daughter. There was no warmth, no laughter underneath. Just a tone you'd use for an insurance agent. "All right," I said, keeping my voice flat. "Talk." "It's about Mark," she began, and I already knew where this was going. "He's in a bit of a situation. Nothing serious, just temporary." Temporary. That word has ruined more people than failure ever did. He made some investments. They didn't pan out. You know how the market is. He just needs some help to get back on his feet. I stood, letting the floor creak under me. My reflection in the kitchen window was pale, washed out by the porch light. A man carved from silence. "How much?" "Dad." She hesitated, her tone shifting. "Practice softness, the kind you use on a tired waiter. It's not about the amount. It's about family. You always said we take care of our own." "How much, Lily?" Her silence spoke before she did. Then, almost gently, 80,000. I could hear her exhale on the other end, like she thought saying it faster would make it smaller. I laughed quietly. Not mockingly, just a hollow, worn-out sound that didn't reach my eyes. $80,000 for what? To buy another chance at pretending? Dad, that's unfair. No. What's unfair is you calling me after months of silence to ask for money. What's unfair is watching your husband drive a new Tesla while you tell me he's struggling. She sighed. That's exactly the attitude I was worried about. You're being selfish again. You always have been. You hoard your money, your house, your feelings. Careful. But she didn't stop. Mom would have understood. She believed in helping people. She wouldn't have turned her back on her family. That name, Mom, slid through the line like a knife. I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. She's not here, I said finally. And if she were, she'd tell you the same thing. You don't know that. I knew her better than anyone. And I know this, she didn't raise you to bail out a gambler. Mark's not a gambler, she shouted. He's trying, Dad. He's just unlucky. But you wouldn't understand that. You've never taken risks. I took a slow breath. You think keeping this house after 3 layoffs and your mother's cancer wasn't a risk? You think raising you alone after the mortgage nearly buried us was easy? She didn't answer. I heard muffled voices in the background, his voice, no doubt, then her whisper. He says forget it. We'll figure it out without you. Then she added, low but sharp enough to slice through the static. Mom was right. You only ever think about yourself. The line went dead. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It had weight, the kind that settles on your chest and refuses to leave. I stared at the phone, waiting for something that wouldn't come, an apology, a soft laugh, anything human. Instead, there was only the rain. I poured the bourbon down the sink and turned the glass upside down. The drain gurgled, like it was swallowing the last good piece of me. The photo on the mantel caught my eye, Lily in her wedding dress, holding Mark's arm like a prize. Behind them, I was smiling. A smile I don't remember meaning. I picked up the photo and set it face down. The sound it made was small, but it felt final. That night, the house felt colder than usual. The kind of cold that isn't in the air but in the soul. For the first time, I didn't feel like a father. I felt like a debt collector no one planned to pay. And as I stood there, staring at my reflection in the dark window, I realized something. They thought they'd called the same man they'd always known, patient, forgiving, predictable. But that man was gone. He'd died somewhere between her words and the click of that phone. And in his place, something else woke up, quieter, steadier, sharper. The kind of man who doesn't raise his voice anymore. The kind who settles debts in silence. 3 days passed before they showed up. No warning, no call, no courtesy, just the crunch of tires on my gravel driveway and the metallic slam of a car door. Through the kitchen window, I saw the white Tesla under the dripping oak tree. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried that wet smell of asphalt and disappointment. They didn't even knock at first, just stood there on the porch, talking in low voices. I watched them the way a man watches a storm from behind glass, calm, distant, knowing it's already too late to move anything inside. When I finally opened the door, Lily stepped forward with a smile too bright for the gray sky. "Dad! We were in the neighborhood." "The neighborhood?" I echoed, looking past her at the Tesla. "That's a 30-minute drive from your place." Mark grinned, that hollow, rehearsed grin of a man who's told too many half-truths. "Hey, Mr. R. You look good. Healthy. Wish I could say the same," I muttered, stepping aside. "Come in." They smelled like expensive perfume and tension. Lily went straight to the living room, where Ellen's old piano sat gathering dust. She ran her fingers along it, pretending to admire. Mark lingered near the door, pretending not to look at the framed photo of the lake house I sold last year, the one that used to pay for her college. "So," I said finally, "let's skip the warm-up. What's this really about?" Mark cleared his throat. "We didn't come to fight, sir. We came to talk like adults. There's a way we can all benefit here." I poured coffee, black for me, sweet for them. The kind of peace offering you give before a firing squad. "Go on," I said. He straightened his jacket. "You have assets sitting idle. The house, the land, your portfolio. We're just suggesting that maybe it's time to make those assets work for the family." "Work?" I repeated. "You mean sign them over?" No, he said quickly. "Just use them more efficiently. Maybe a joint business. Lily mentioned you still have that safe deposit box. We could." "That's enough," I said quietly. Lily turned, cup in hand. "Dad, listen, please. You're being stubborn. Mark's right, your money's just sitting there. You could invest in something meaningful. Help us get started. You always said you wanted us to be independent. Independent people don't start with someone else's savings," I said. Her jaw tightened. "You don't understand what it's like out there. Everything's changed. Prices, interests, jobs. You had stability. We don't." I leaned back, studying her face. She looked like her mother when she was angry, that same trembling lip, that same desperate need to be right. Only Ellen's anger came from love. Lily's came from pride. Mark set his cup down too hard, splashing coffee on the table. "Look," he said, "we're not asking for charity. Think of it as an opportunity. You invest 80 now, and in 6 months. "Stop," I said. "You don't believe that sentence." "I don't either." His smile cracked. "You're judging me, sir, but I'm trying to build something. Everyone takes risks. Risks are fine," I said. "But you don't get to gamble with other people's chips." Lily exhaled, loud and theatrical. "You always have to moralize, don't you? It's always about right and wrong. You never just trust." "Trust is earned," I said. "You spend it." That hit her. I could see it. But instead of softening, she struck back harder. "Do you even hear yourself? You sound bitter. Like you want to punish us for moving on with our lives. You've been alone too long. Maybe you like it that way, sitting in this museum of a house, drinking, pretending you're better than everyone." Mark added, "She's right, sir. You're isolating yourself. Maybe if you helped family more, you'd have one left." It was a good line, rehearsed, smooth, cruel. I stood slowly, letting the chair creak. "Get out." Lily blinked. "What?" "You heard me." Her face twisted, disbelief, then fury. "You're really throwing your own daughter out? Over what, money?" "No," I said. "Over respect." She laughed, short and bitter. "You think you've got moral high ground? You hoard everything, even love. That's why Mom was miserable. You controlled everything. Every dollar, every decision. That one landed deep. I didn't flinch, but my hands trembled once before finding stillness again. Your mother was sick, I said quietly. She needed stability. That's what I gave her. No, Lily whispered. You gave her fear. The fear of disappointing you. For a moment, the house was dead silent. Even the clock seemed to hold its breath. Mark took her arm, but she shook him off, stepping closer. You don't care about us, Dad. You care about control. You call it love, but it's selfish. Always was. There it was again, selfish. Same word, sharper now, cutting deeper the second time. I could have shouted. Could have slammed the table or broken the glass. Instead, I said, you should leave before you say something you can't take back. She hesitated. Her eyes flickered, maybe guilt, maybe victory. Then she said softly but with venom, maybe you don't deserve a family. The words hung there like smoke. She turned to go. Mark followed, pausing at the door. You'll regret this, sir. Families help each other. Don't make yourself the enemy. When the door shut, I stood there for a long time, listening to the sound of their car reversing down the drive, tires spinning in the wet gravel, throwing mud onto the white paint. I looked around the room. Every photo, every frame, every piece of furniture seemed to shrink away from me, like even the house was ashamed. I picked up the coffee cup she'd left half full. Lipstick stain on the rim, faint pink, familiar. I washed it, dried it, and set it back in the cabinet. I don't know why I did that. Maybe to remind myself there was once a daughter behind that voice. But as the sound of the Tesla faded into the night, I understood something final. They hadn't come for forgiveness or help. They'd come to test how much they could still take before I broke. And I almost did. Almost. That's when I realized revenge doesn't start with anger. It starts with silence. The kind that fills a house after the last door closes, and whispers, it's time. The morning after they left, I woke before dawn. The house held that thin, expectant silence like a lung waiting for a gasp. I walked to the study and put on the kettle though I hadn't planned to drink the tea. Small habits anchor you when the world tips. James was at his desk before I called him. James, my lawyer of 30 years, the type of man whose face looked like a document, worn, authoritative, impossible to surprise. We met over coffee that turned into courtrooms and then into quiet Sundays where we spoke of taxes and funerals like old men trading stamps. You sound tired, he said when he picked up. Tired of being taken for granted, I answered. He came by that afternoon, briefcase heavy, tie straight despite the heat. He sat without asking, flipping open my old ledger, as if he could read my life in the numbers. I watched him set a pile of papers between us, trust forms, a new will draft, a power of attorney addendum. His pen was small and precise like a scalpel. You want to change things, he said. Not a question. I want accounts to reflect truth, I said. I want obligations to match responsibility. James smiled, that half smile that's polite and dangerous. You know how to cut legally, R. We can set conditional bequests, discretionary trusts, clawbacks. If someone misrepresents themselves, we can trigger penalties. We can tie distributions to verifiable events. We can make them choose between greed and inheritance. Make it clean, I said. No theatrics. No vengeance for its own sake. Just consequences. He nodded. We'll make sure the law does the humiliating part. Later, I called Ella Reed, not because I trusted detectives, but because professional curiosity untangles human lies. Ella had been a private investigator for years, the sort of woman who wore no-nonsense boots and had patience like a steel trap. I met her in a cafe where the sugar jars were already empty and the staff knew not to ask questions. I'll do surveillance, she said, laying out timelines like cards. Bank runs, meetings, receipts. Small things, dinners at clubs, transfers to shell companies, evidence of luxury purchases. People who borrow show off. People who steal hide in plain sight. Quietly, I told her. I don't want headlines. Headlines don't help in a will dispute, she said bluntly. Documents do. While James wrote the scaffolding, Ella gathered the bricks. I signed forms, paid retainer fees, and watched the slow machinery of consequence fold itself into place. Every appointment, every voice on the phone, felt like moving chess pieces across a board where the rules were my memory and their hubris. But legal levers alone felt cold and distant. Revenge, to be lasting, needed theater, not loud, but precise. I wanted them to feel the weight of their own choices in a place they'd always trusted, the ledger of our family. That week, I visited the bank. The long corridor smelled of polished wood and old money. The clerk who knew my name greeted me with a careful respect. I asked about the safe deposit I kept for Ellen's letters and a stack of old stock certificates. The manager showed me the ledger, its columns neat and indifferent. I took the contents out. Letters in my wife's looping hand, faded photographs, a deed from a summer cottage I'd sold for reasons none of them knew, stock certificates gathering dust from companies that had long since vanished. I looked at each item and felt the geometry of memory, how love, like capital, accrues interest or evaporates. I could have burned everything, thrown it into the river. That would have been a man's temper, a child's revenge. Instead, I catalogued. I made copies. I placed originals in a new envelope and set conditions with James, instructions that would uncurl like a blade when the time came. At home, I began rearranging small things in the living room as if to confirm that this house was mine and mine alone. I turned 2 pictures face down on the mantel. I moved Lily's favorite chair by 2 inches. Small gestures, noticed later as premeditation, would be read then as intention. People think revenge is loud. They mistake fireworks for strategy. My plan required a quieter percussion. It needed to sound like inevitability when it finally landed, not like a shout, but like the final, unavoidable tick of a clock. I rehearsed my voice in the mirror, not the shouting voice, but the voice that says one sentence and means it. No. It was a small word, and yet it became a hammer. I practiced saying it until my tongue could hold the weight. Night after night I sat at the kitchen table with James's drafts and Ella's reports. I read bank statements until numbers blurred into patterns. I listened to recordings Ella had captured of Mark's phone calls, laughter over dinner with people who didn't know his debts, promises made to strangers he never intended to keep. Each tape made me colder, not because hate grows easily, but because clarity sharpens like frost. But I did not make my move yet. Timing, I had learned, mattered more than fury. A trap set too early snaps back on the setter. Too late, and they scatter like birds. There was a moment, somewhere between their audacity and public record, when everything would align. So I did what I had always done with hard decisions, I tended to small details. I wrote a letter I would never send, where I told Lily the exact things that hurt. I folded it, and placed it in a drawer where only my hands would find it. It was a relic of feeling, a map of why I had chosen the path I had. Then I drafted a simple, ordinary notice, an invitation to lunch. Not for them, not yet. For Mark's investors, for people who liked to pretend his deals were real. For the kind of people Mark wanted to impress. A luncheon. A presentation. A promise that sounded like opportunity. It would be an ordinary affair with expensive canapes and a projector, nothing theatrical. But behind the projector would be documents, contracts, transfers, proof of debts. And later, when James opened the trust, the luncheon would be a marked moment in a timeline that proved intent. I slept little. When I did, the house breathed around me like an animal that had learned patience. I kept my bourbon in the freezer and did not touch it. Not yet. On the 5th day, as dusk bled into the sky, Ella called. "He bought a watch," she said. "Not a cheap one. Paid in cash." I placed the receiver down and walked to the mantel where the face-down photo of Lily and Mark sat. I lifted it carefully, not to see their smiles but to feel the friction of what had been. Then I turned it back down and closed the edge of the drawer where I kept the unsent letter. They wanted my weakness, my chest, my house, my small acts of mercy. They thought I would fold like paper in the rain. They thought my solitude made me soft. Instead, I sat and did the thing that makes men dangerous. I became methodical. I turned my hurt into criteria, my sorrow into clauses, my worry into evidence. Revenge, I decided, would not be spectacle. It would be proof. It would be the law and the ledger and the slow, undeniable arithmetic of choices. It would be the moment they read their own handwriting and realized they had written their ruin. When James left that night, he tapped the file on his way out and said, "They'll come for you again." "Let them," I answered. My voice had the sound of a room emptied of ghost songs. "They'll find silence." And in that silence, the plan began to move, quiet gears, small, certain noises that, when set properly, make the strongest houses fall. They always forget how much theater there is in ordinary things. For a week I moved like a man repainting a house, every stroke quiet, every corner deliberate. Only this time the paint was paperwork and the brushes were other people's routines. Ella's reports arrived folded in envelopes. She had the knack of turning small embarrassments into ironclad facts. Photos of Mark at an Italian restaurant, the bill paid in cash, a waiter's receipt with the watch brand scribbled in the margin. A snapshot of Lily laughing as Mark slid a credit card over a tabletop. A GPS ping showing a transfer of cars between addresses that didn't match any business they claimed. "People who live on credit live on exposure," Ella said when I met her at noon, her boots scuffing the cafe floor. "They show off to hide the hole." "You collected everything?" I asked. She set a thin folder on the table. "Calls. Meetings. Purchases. I recorded a conversation with a man Mark calls Anton, offshore sounding, expensive accent. Mark promised returns that sound like lies even when you want to believe them." I opened the folder. The photo of Mark's wristwatch looked ridiculous among mortgage notices and charitable pledge forms. He'd worn it like armor. "That will do," I said. While Ella stitched together the public evidence, James worked the private law. He drafted clauses with an artist's cruelty, conditional disbursements for trust distributions that required verifiable income and absence of material misrepresentations, as defined in grinding legalese. He formatted a clawback provision that could demand recoupment if transfers proved fraudulent. He wrote instructions that would allow me to direct distributions to charity instead of people who'd used my name for personal leverage. "Make it look customary," I told him. "Make it look like a man planning for probate, not a man setting traps. You want the estate to look respectable," James said. "Then we'll bury the teeth in the fine print." I left the office with a file so thick it bruised my hand. I put the draft in my briefcase and drove to the title company. I asked about records, about the chain of sales on the lake house I'd sold years ago. There was a deed missing from the file, a small administrative error that the clerk promised to correct. I made a note. Small errors can become loud when arranged properly. The play required witnesses. Not loud, emotional witnesses, but people who would testify to patterns. The concierge who heard late-night calls, the clerk who saw cash transfers, the accountant who'd handled Mark's dinners. I called old favors, the florist who had once worked for Ellen, the neighbor who'd shoveled my walk every winter, and I asked them to remember details, any small oddity. Recollection is a pliable thing. Asked correctly, it becomes testimony. Meanwhile, I planned the luncheon. It needed to be ordinary. A restaurant that catered to retirees with trust funds and men who liked the smell of lemon oil on mahogany. I reserved a private room disguised as an investor meet and greet. Invitations went out on inconspicuous stationery. An informal gathering to discuss opportunities. Mark would come because the word opportunity is a narcotic to him. But I did not invite Lily. That was deliberate. Mark liked to perform in front of a crowd. Lily preferred the intimacy of their small, private dramas. Ella found two men who'd been on the receiving end of Mark's promises, a landscaper who'd loaned him $7,000 for materials, and a woman who'd been paid in promissory notes, for catering that never happened. They all agreed to attend a lunch, not as heralds of doom, but as witnesses to a pattern. The morning of the luncheon, I drove early. The city was soft with people who had no idea they were props. I sat in my car until my hands stopped shaking, then walked inside like an ordinary man. Mark arrived late, with the same swagger of someone who's rehearsed sincerity. He wore the watch like a crown. He shook hands, his laughter polite and automatic. I let the conversation build. When someone asked about the market, Mark leapt into his usual sermon: returns, leverage, trust in networks. A woman nodded, half believing. Then I asked, "Do you have proof of investor transfers, Mark?" He smiled. "Of course. We operate transparently. Would you be comfortable sharing an audited statement?" He hesitated. The landscaper across the table raised a hand. "You gave me a promissory note instead of a check." "Still waiting." Mark's eyes flicked. "I'm handling it. Time is different from disappearing," the man said. The waiter froze mid-step. "It's personal," Mark muttered. "I can manage my own obligations." That was enough. The air shifted. The mask slipped. In court, routine matters are anchors. In the weeks after, those signatures would become the net that held testimony. Back home, I found an envelope on the kitchen table, a letter addressed to my family in my hand, the one I'd written and not meant to send. I read it again and, for the first time, understood how little I'd left unspoken. The letter said what I could not say to their faces: the injuries, the betrayals, the reasons for my decisions. I slid it back into the drawer, because some documents are meant to be kept private until the ledger speaks. I asked James to prepare a friendly-sounding notice, an offer to mediate, to discuss restructuring if Mark produced audited accounts and proof of cleared debts. It was a rope thrown toward reconciliation, a rope that could be cut if they chose deception. "You're patient," James remarked. "Not patient," I corrected. "Strategic." The next days were a choreography of small humiliations: a phone call from Ella reporting Mark buying plane tickets he couldn't afford, a bank alert showing a transfer to a shell corporation in a name that changed spelling each month, a voicemail I saved where Mark promised returns to a friend and asked them to keep quiet. But the most important detail was empathy turned into instrument. I called Lily. I left a message in my softest voice, the voice that remembered lullabies, and told her I missed her. It was true in a way. I told her I wanted to talk about the estate, not to punish, but to ensure fairness if hard times came. I wanted her to feel the possibility of reconciliation like a trapdoor, comfortable enough to stand on, but not strong enough to hold weight. She didn't come. Instead, she texted, "You'll see." 2 words, a threat wrapped in a promise. I smiled. She thought she had the initiative. She did not know how well I had catalogued the past weeks. We built the trap on ordinary things: signatures, receipts, hearsay confirmed by documentation. People like Mark always left soft tails: a receipt here, a promissory note there, a thank you message that mentioned a date. I collected everything and folded it into the legal scaffolding James had prepared. Ella mailed copies to a secure address and stored originals with a notary. The ledger grew like a quiet animal, patient and inevitable. At night, I sat with the drafts and listened for the sound that would mean it was time. It wasn't the clink of glass or the thunder of anger. It was the small, distinct tick of a watch, the one Mark had bought, somewhere in my memory. It sounded like counting down. On the last evening before the trust amendment took effect, I walked to the porch and looked at the empty drive. I felt no joy. There was no elation in what I had done, only a cold satisfaction similar to the feeling after removing a splinter with steady fingers. It hurt, and it was precise. It needed to be. When I finally signed the papers, James stamped them with a calm hand. He slid a copy across the desk. "They'll read it and think it's just bureaucracy," he said. "They won't notice the mechanism until it triggers." "Good," I said. "Let them not notice." Then I did what men who are good at endings do. I waited. The trap was set in plain view. It would not be loud, nor would it be violent. It would be inevitable. The documents would speak, the witnesses would corroborate, and the ledger would be relentless. They liked to think they had all the time in the world, until the calendar said otherwise. And as the house settled that night, I understood the final truth: cruelty is easy, the difficulty, the art, is in making truth unbearable. The trap, patient and quiet, hummed under the floorboards like a well-tuned clock. The rest was only timing. 2 weeks after the luncheon, the phone rang again. Different tone this time, that half-afraid brightness people use when they realize the game might be ending. "Dad," Lily said, breathless. "We need to talk. Something's wrong." There it was again, we. Always we, never I. "I'm listening," I said. "Mark's accounts, they're frozen. The bank says there's an issue with some filings under your name. Did you do something?" I didn't answer. I let the sound of her panic fill the pause. The same silence that used to protect her now pressed against her. "Dad, please. They're saying it's fraud. You have to tell them it's a misunderstanding." "It isn't," I said quietly. "What?" "The misunderstanding was thinking I wouldn't protect myself." That morning, 3 envelopes arrived at 3 addresses. One to Mark's investors. One to the regional bank director. One to Lily. Each contained the same letter, signed by James, calm, professional, written in the cold grammar of law. "Dear Sir/Madam, we write to inform you that the undersigned, Mr. R. F., has amended his living trust following discovery of financial misrepresentation by the parties herein described. Below it, attachments. Receipts. Emails. A notarized statement from the luncheon witnesses. Copies of the same promissory notes Mark had signed under my name. Not accusations, proof." Within hours, the whispers began. The investors called Mark. He told them it was a setup. They asked for paperwork. He promised it by morning. But morning brought an article, a quiet note in the Austin Financial Courier. "Local entrepreneur under review for possible securities violations." No photographs. No adjectives. Just the kind of headline that makes phones stop ringing. He came to the house the next day, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt, arrogance evaporated by fear. "You ruined me," he said. "You called the papers." "No," I said. "The papers called the facts." He paced, breathing hard. "You set me up. That lunch, you planted those people." "They planted themselves," I said. "You fertilized them with lies." He slammed his hand on the table. "You think this makes you a hero? You destroyed your daughter's life." I didn't rise. I just looked at him, and the quiet made him smaller. "You destroyed it when you made her believe love comes with interest rates." "She loves me," he hissed. "No," I said. "She loves the man she thought could outsmart consequence." He flinched. He wasn't used to losing control in front of witnesses, and I was the last one he ever wanted. "She'll never forgive you," he said finally. "I didn't ask her to," I said. "I asked her to remember." By evening, his investors had pulled out. 2 demanded refunds. 1 threatened a lawsuit. The bank froze the joint account Lily used for their mortgage. She called again. Her voice was hoarse from crying, the kind of cry that leaves no tears, only breathless anger. "How could you do this to us?" "I didn't do it to you," I said. "I just stopped covering for you. You think this is justice? You think humiliating us makes you righteous?" "Justice," I said, "doesn't humiliate. It reveals. Mom would be ashamed of you." For a moment I saw her not as the woman before me, but as the girl who once brought me burnt pancakes on Father's Day and cried because they were crooked. That child had loved without calculation. I wondered when she'd learned to trade affection for leverage. I almost smiled. Then she'd finally have company. The line went dead. James managed the rest. Mark's name came up in 2 audit inquiries, not because I pushed, but because the paper trail was too loud to ignore. Ella's recordings became sworn statements, her photos, exhibits. When the subpoenas arrived, they landed like stones dropped into still water, no explosion, just rings expanding outward. James called one evening. They're going to negotiate. He wants a settlement before charges appear. Let him, I said. He'll offer to pay you back. I don't want his money. What do you want? Silence. He understood. Silence means erasure. A week later, Lily came alone. No Tesla this time. Just her small sedan, tires whispering on the gravel. She didn't knock. She walked straight in like she still lived here. You win, she said. Is that what you wanted? To see me humiliated? To see him broken? I wanted you free, I said. Free? From what? From a man who teaches you deceit and calls it love. She shook her head, eyes bright with fury. You don't understand love. Maybe not, I said. But I understand debt. She stared at me for a long time. Then she said something softer. I hate what you've become. I've always been this, I said. You just stopped pretending it was kindness. She turned to go. At the door, she hesitated. What will people think of us? They'll think the truth, I said. And that's the worst punishment of all. The assets Mark had used as collateral, his cars, his business equipment, his ridiculous watch, went to auction quietly. I bought none of it. I didn't even attend. James did. He told me afterward the watch sold for half its price, the Tesla for less. I asked who bought them. He said, a dealer in Houston. Doesn't matter. It matters, I said. Someone should drive that arrogance out of town. That night, I opened the old safe and placed Ellen's letters back inside. Not as nostalgia, as balance. The world, for once, felt properly weighed. 2 months later, the trust executed automatically. A portion of my estate transferred to the local veterans' home. Another to an animal rescue Ellen had loved. Lily received one clause only, a sealed envelope to be opened in the presence of counsel. Inside, a check for $1 and a copy of a ledger entry. Forgiven, but not forgotten. It wasn't spite. It was accuracy. James asked. Are you sure you want it like this? She'll contest. She can, I said. Contesting means admitting it's true. He nodded, folded the papers, and filed them. Time passed with the efficiency of bureaucracy. Mark vanished from headlines. People like him always do. They change cities, grow beards, rebrand. Lily moved to her mother's sister's place in Dallas. No calls, no letters. Ella stopped by once, left a potted plant on my porch. Closure looks good on you, she said. Closure's overrated, I said. Stillness will do. At night I sat on the porch with coffee instead of bourbon. The same porch where she'd once played guitar as a kid. The same sky, now mercilessly quiet. There was a moment, 3 months after everything, when the phone rang at midnight. I almost answered. Then I didn't. Some debts are better unpaid. I let the machine pick up. Her voice was small, cautious. Dad? I just wanted to say. I understand now. The message ended there. No apology, no promise. Just understanding. That was enough. Not forgiveness, just comprehension. The papers were settled, the investigations closed. No indictments, no drama. Only consequences. The world forgets headlines faster than sins. One evening I stood by the window watching the last lights slide off the lake. I realized I didn't hate them. I didn't feel anything. Revenge, it turns out, isn't fire. It's frost, silent, clean, and absolute. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and whispered to the empty room. You wanted my weakness. I gave you my silence instead. And somewhere in that stillness, I felt it, not victory, not peace, just the absence of noise. That, for a man my age, was enough. The day I left the house, the sky was the same color as the porch paint, a dull, forgiving gray. No rain this time, just that slow autumn light that makes everything honest. I closed the door and didn't lock it. There was nothing inside worth protecting anymore. James had offered to sell the place for me, but I told him to wait. Let the air take it first. Let it forget me on its own. I packed light, a single duffel, Ellen's letters, one photo of Lily when she was 7, missing her front teeth and holding a stray cat like it was treasure. That photo was proof that love had once existed, even if it didn't survive the translation to adulthood. The truck started slow, reluctant, like it didn't want to witness another departure. As I pulled out of the drive, the gravel whispered under the tires, the same sound it made the day they left in anger. This time, there was no echo. Just space. I took the long road out of Austin, the one that passes through the open plains where the sky feels too big to judge you. The radio stayed off. Silence had become a kind of music, predictable, forgiving, clean. At the gas station near Waco, the clerk recognized me from the old neighborhood. "Heard about your family," he said too gently. I nodded. "People hear about everything eventually." He offered a pity smile, the kind you give to ghosts, and handed me a receipt. I didn't stop again until I reached the coast. The Gulf was empty that morning, just wind, gulls, and a sea that didn't care what I'd done. I walked along the shoreline with my shoes in hand and the photograph in my pocket. The waves didn't take much notice. That's what I liked about the ocean, it doesn't forgive or condemn, it just keeps going. I sat on a rock until the light changed. The horizon blurred into copper, and the sound of the tide became something between breathing and confession. I took Ellen's last letter from the envelope, the one she'd written during her final hospital stay, the one I hadn't been able to read until now. "Don't hold on too tightly," she'd written. "Even love suffocates when it can't breathe." For the first time in months I smiled. Not the warm kind, just a small, tired recognition that she'd been right all along. I tore the letter in half, then into quarters, and let the pieces fall into the water. Not as penance, but as punctuation. That night I stayed in a motel where the walls were thin and the air smelled of salt. I watched the lights of fishing boats move slowly across the water, like small, deliberate stars. For a long time I tried to imagine Lily's face if she ever drove past the old house, saw the lights off, the mailbox empty. Maybe she'd stop. Maybe not. But I hoped, someday, she'd understand that the things I did weren't out of hatred. They were lessons written in a language she refused to learn until it was too late. I picked up the phone once, thinking I might call her. Then I didn't. Some words lose meaning when spoken too late. The following morning, I left the motel key on the counter and drove toward nowhere in particular. Every few miles, the road dipped into fog, and I thought about how life looks clearer when you stop needing it to. Revenge hadn't healed anything. It hadn't brought forgiveness or peace or love back. But it had done something quieter, it had ended things. And endings, when you reach my age, are their own kind of mercy. At a rest stop outside Corpus Christi, I took out my notebook and wrote one final line beneath Ellen's handwriting. "Justice is colder than love, but it lasts longer." Then I closed the book, placed it on the passenger seat, and kept driving. When the sun dipped below the horizon, I pulled over to watch it, that slow, deliberate disappearance, the day swallowing itself in silence. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure in the distance, a woman in white, turning toward the sea. Maybe memory. Maybe mercy. The wind came in from the Gulf, carrying salt and something that might have been forgiveness if I'd been younger. I breathed it in anyway. And when the last light faded, I whispered, "That'll do." Then I started the engine, and the night took me back. If this story moved you, please support the channel by liking the video, subscribing, and leaving a comment with your thoughts. To continue the journey, click the box on the left for the next story. Thank you for being here.